Greetings, everyone. My name is Thomas Pawlowski. I'm a member of the International Environment Forum, which you can find on the web at iefworld.org. Today, I'm going to talk to you about climate change and discuss the scientific and spiritual challenges. At any point or at the end, if you would like to contact me and have some dialogue, you can see my email address at the bottom of this first slide, which I'm just about to share on screen right now. Okay, so you should have that visible. So let's go ahead and dive right into this. So first of all, some basics. What is climate change? So a key thing is that climate is not weather. In fact, a climate data point really represents about a 25-year average of what's going on in the weather. So it looks at the long-term shifts in temperatures and weather patterns. These shifts can be from natural sources like changes in solar activity, volcanic eruptions, the orbit of the Earth. However, none of these natural causes explain the warming that we have seen over the last bunch of decades. The average temperature of the surface of the Earth is 2 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than it was in the late 1800s, which basically is the time when we first started really taking records and keeping good, accurate records of it. And so it's also warmer than any time in our past 100,000 years. And you'll see in this graph that the global surface temperature has increased substantially, in this case, 1.1 degrees Celsius from in around that range of 2011, 2020, as compared to the range of 1850 to 1900. And so that's very well depicted on that graph. And this is not simulation, right? This is actual recorded data. So there's no disputing the data record. So there's a whole lot of very interesting questions that we should ask ourselves, and it begins with this one. Is human activity really responsible for global warming? Well, the overwhelming consensus in the community of climate scientists is yes. So since the 1800s, human activities have been the primary driver, largely from burning fossil fuels like coal and oil and gas. Burning these fuels generates greenhouse gas emissions. We use the short form GHG, greenhouse gas. And these emissions act like a blanket, trapping the sun's heat and raising the temperatures. The main greenhouse gases that cause climate change include a few. One is carbon dioxide, another is methane, and nitrous oxide, chlorofluorocarbons, and also water vapor, which of course can occur naturally. In fact, all of these occur naturally as well. Clearing land and cutting down forests releases carbon dioxide principally. There are a number of sources of methane from our activities, such as agriculture and oil and gas operations. And there are sectors that are the main causes of greenhouse gases, and which includes the energy sector, industrial, transportation, construction, and agriculture and land use. So these all have their own contributions. Human activities cause greenhouse gases that are warming the world faster than at any traceable time in our history. And this is confirmed through extensive computer modeling. Another good question to ask, is rising temperature the only impact? And it's not, although it is a huge impact. But the Earth is a system in which everything is connected. And so changes in one area can influence changes in all of the other areas too. And these have consequences. And even though, right, I made the statement that climate isn't weather, right? We look at longer term averages, like 25-year periods rather than day by day. However, in the news, you have surely noticed that there is a greater intensity of drought, of water scarcity, of severe fires, of rising sea level, flooding, melting polar ice, catastrophic storms, right, which come from the increased energy, right, the heat of the oceans being higher, that warms the air more, and that provides more energy access to these storms. And so the storms are more catastrophic. In fact, recently, and I'm recording this on June 5th, which is World Environment Day, a great day to really take stock of all these things. But as of June 5th, right, just a while ago, oh, by the way, June 5th, 2024, that's helpful to, for the record. But we've had tremendously powerful tornadoes, many more than we're used to. And we're just about getting into hurricane season. And the prediction is that there will be more large category hurricanes during this coming season. Also, we've seen declining biodiversity. We've seen forced human migration as conditions become just too severe and people just don't want to keep rebuilding, then they move to some other place. And that's very difficult, especially with the less wealthy citizens of our world. And there's increased atmospheric turbulence. So speaking of the news again, just a few days ago, we had another report of an airplane that had a sudden loss of altitude, and one person even died in the cabin of the airplane as a result of that. It was really severe, lots of injuries, many hospitalizations. So, and this is not just coincidental, right? The instability of the atmosphere is caused by the changing patterns and the increased amount of energy that is available. So on top of all this, there are feedback loops. Two examples I'll give you of that. One is ice is a very good reflector of the sun's rays. And so that means the Earth absorbs less of the energy. Well, the loss of ice means that there's less reflection. Therefore, the ground is absorbing more heat, and that increases the average temperature. Another example we have is melting permafrost. So, for instance, northern Canada and northern Russia. So that land that's normally always frozen actually is melting during the summer. And that is allowing methane to bubble up from the ground, which no longer has an icy coating. And that adds to the concentration of methane in the atmosphere, which is a greenhouse gas, and that causes more warming as well. So these cycles, these feedback loops are bad loops, right? Because the effect that caused the change amplifies the change, right? And so we call that normally, if it's a good feedback loop, it's a virtuous cycle. In this case, it's very much not. Another good question, will everyone experience climate change the same way? No, they will not. In fact, already we can see a great divergence of experiences. So climate change can affect our health, our ability to grow food, our housing, our safety, right, in terms of environmental safety, and our work. And so some people are more vulnerable than others, such as people living in small island nations or in developing countries where they don't have the means just to go somewhere else, or they don't have the land to go to without crossing a border. Flooding and sea level rise and saltwater intrusion have forced communities to relocate. In fact, entire islands have had to be abandoned, right? This is a pretty severe impact. Protracted droughts put people at risk of famine. You can't grow food if the vegetation, right, is not supported by the land. And the number of climate refugees, right, those who have to flee because of these changes that are out of their control, that number is expected to keep rising. Another good question, does the amount of temperature rise matter? And yes, the consensus among scientists and governments is that we should do everything we can to limit the rise to only 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit from that pre-industrialization era. If we could do this, it would help us avoid the worst of the climate impacts and maintain a more livable environment. But I'm afraid to give you the bad news. You probably know already that we're not on track to stay below this target, but we're heading most assuredly to a rise of about 5 degrees Fahrenheit by the year 2100. If we look at a little bit of the history, the United States has emitted the most greenhouse gas historically, and China is currently emitting the most. I'm going to show some graphs on the next page. It doesn't isolate it by country. It represents it more by region. But if you look on the left side of the page over here, we see North America has had all in through the history from 1850 until recently, the most human-caused carbon dioxide emissions of any other region. And secondly is Europe, and third is Eastern Asia, and so forth. If you look on the right-hand side of the curve, the vertical scale is now representing the emissions per person living in those various regions. But then the width of the curve is representing the population. And so the total emissions is the area of each of these big bars. And so now we're seeing that although North America is still the greatest offender per person, there are so many more people in Eastern Asia that as a region, they are causing more of these greenhouse gas emissions than the other regions of the world. I'm going to show a few kind of overview slides. This one, in fact, several of these slides I'm borrowing from a friend of mine in the International Environment Forum who did really some fabulous work on these. And so there are 9 planetary boundaries that we've categorized, and you can see the titles of them. We have crossed, right, and so green is good, of course, that's the safe operating zone, and then the darker red, or even towards blackish, almost black, the closer you get to that dark color, the more we're stressing the planet. And so the boundaries are being transgressed. And so there are 9 of these, and by the year 2009, we had crossed 3 of these boundaries. By 2015, we crossed a 4th one, and by 2023, we have crossed 6 boundaries, right? There's only these 3 here that we haven't exceeded that safe zone, which is this little faint gray line here. So this isn't a positive message. This next page is just showing the carbon cycle. I'm not going to dwell here. If you want to look at it for a length of time, then go ahead and just pause the video and look as long as you like. But basically, they're showing 2 things here. So one is like a repository for carbon. They call it in the image here the carbon stocks. And these lines represent the fluxes, right? The change per year that we're getting in that. The units everywhere is in petagrams of carbon. Peta is 10 to the power of 15, right? So each unit is 10 to the power of 15 grams of carbon. And so have a look at this and get just a feel for where things are moving, right, and changing. That's the flux. This next chart, you also might want to pause on it at some point, but this is showing the risk of global extinction in a number of different groups of species in the world. And so the darkest color means it's already extinct in the wild. And so what percentage, right? That's the horizontal width. What percentage is in that category for each of these classes of things? And so the more green you see, the better. The more red and especially the dark color, then obviously that's really bad. So have a look at that. We do have a couple of categories that are more susceptible than others, like amphibians and cycads, and others that are less sensitive, but they could still end up in trouble too. So this next chart is showing what's driving these issues. And so this is narrowing, or I should say, lumping things into broader categories. So this set here, right, and each color represents a cause, such as the darkest here is the use change of either the land or the sea involved. And then there's direct exploitation. There's the climate change contribution. There's the pollution contribution, invasive alien species, which is also caused by human activity as well. And then there's the miscellaneous. So you can see all these reasons amounting to what's driving declines in terrestrial life. And the next category is freshwater life. And the last is saltwater, or on the chart here, it says marine life. And so it's showing the source of the decline in biodiversity. So let's go to our next interesting question. And so we've looked at the general things, and now let's get a little bit more specific. So what are the scientific and engineering challenges that we face? Well, there are quite a few. I can't list everything in detail here, but to give you a feel, so there's a few categories. The one is that we need improved data gathering resolution, meaning that in some cases we need better quality of data, but we definitely need a lot more places from which we're gathering the data. Second category, we need improved modeling, most particularly in the vapor or cloud modeling that is part of the climate modeling software. Another category is we need a much better understanding of the many interactions between these subsystems. And although we have tremendous knowledge, but we get surprised all the time. So one example, I already gave you one example, the melting permafrost, right? And unless you have really studied that, it's a big surprise that that is releasing methane, right? As the ice cover is melting, and there can actually now be air exchange into the ground, and the methane is getting released. And years ago, we had no idea that was going to happen, right? And so these feedback loops and all these interactions, but there's many, many other examples that we can have of that. Actually, one example I'll give you too. It's not directly related to climate change, but it's just an illustration that we always have more to learn. You may even know some of the story, but wolves were not in Yellowstone National Park in the United States, right? They were basically gone from the park. And biologists were arguing that we should reintroduce the wolves. And then almost as many were arguing, no, that would be a disaster, right? It's going to create havoc. And then, of course, the non-scientists, right, the farmers who have land on the outskirts, outside of the park, uh, were very fearful that the wolves would start attacking their livestock. And right, so there are a lot of people opposed to this. But ultimately, it was decided to go ahead and reintroduce the wolves. Well, nobody predicted what would happen as a result of that. And so the bottom line is that everything got better in the entire Yellowstone ecosystem. And this really shocked people. So what happened? Well, the wolves started thinning the herd of deer and elk in the park. And the thinning of the herd, right? Which, I mean, the wolves are only getting the weaker ones, right? The sick and the weak. And so this did reduce the population, but also it kept the herds moving, right? If there are no predators, the herds don't move. They dwell in a spot because why should they work hard to get what they're eating, right? So they stick around the same place, and that is pretty ravaging on that environment, right? They eat up all the new shoots and things like that. And so it's not the same environment. But once the wolves were back, uh, the the herds were reduced in size, but they moved around more. And that allowed the recovery to a more natural state of a lot of the ecosystem. And so the wetlands improved. They had all kinds of impacts, and all of them were positive impacts. And right at the end of that, the biologists who were not dumb people, right? They were fantastically knowledgeable. They're like, huh, go figure, right? And so they learned a lot from that reintroduction. So that's an example, uh, right, of we don't even know how much we don't know in many cases until we get to that point. Okay, another factor, another challenge is that we need many more clean energy systems. I know this is not an exaggeration to say we have to 100% abandon fossil fuel. Obviously, we can't do such a radical change overnight, right? That would be so disruptive to the world. We just couldn't tolerate it. But we need that vision, we need that plan to abandon the use of the fossil fuels. And so, right, we need to also look at our transportation systems, our agriculture systems, uh, how intelligently we engineer cities. We have to have recycling that works, right? We need to do a lot of different things, and each one would have its contribution to making things better. Oh, and why am I saying recycling that actually works, right? Well, here's a sad tale. What happened in our whole history of plastic recycling, right? We had this whole industry that said, yeah, switch over to plastic. It's going to be great, right? And don't worry about pollution because we're going to recycle everything that we make. Well, that didn't happen, right? Whether knowingly or naively, whatever the right, it didn't happen. And so, if you look on the bottom of many of the plastic products, you'll see this kind of triangular symbol with a number inside. And the numbers go from 1 through, I don't know, I suppose 9. Don't quote me on that. But very few of those numbers actually get recycled to any degree at all, and some literally to zero because it's too hard to do, right? So here was this promise of, hey, switch over to this material and we're going to recycle it all and it's going to be great. And less than 15% of all the plastic made gets recycled. And a lot of the plastic made is single use. There's no hope even of recycling it. And so uh, it's not a tolerable situation at all. So let's look now at what is the real root cause. of the climate crisis. So it boils down to it's human, but what aspect? Well, it's human systems, it's human beliefs, it's human attitudes, and it's human choices. But the word human is in there all the time. So our worldwide rampant materialism has bred a culture of consumerism in the name of a strong global economy. And that promotes a habit of consumption that seeks to satisfy the basest and most selfish desires, right? We all want more, right? We keep feeding that lower nature of humanity that just wants, it wants, it wants, right? And doesn't care about the consequences of that. And so just to drill in a little bit more as well, right? It's not only the materialism, another aspect though, I guess it's all material, but another aspect is that our financial system, right? The stock market rewards growth and it penalizes all the companies that are not growing. And so the companies, using a car analogy, right? They have to have their foot pressing hard on that gas pedal. They have to keep accelerating, right? And just keep going, keep going. And you can't let off because the financial industry will devastate you if you don't keep growing. Whether or not you should be growing, right? It demands it. Um, Harm to the environment goes with little or no consequences to the perpetrators. Let's see, what's an example? Let's take mining, like strip mining, the worst possible devastation to the land, right? They just literally forever ruin that landscape. Well, so a company will mine it, they get all that great money from whatever material they're getting from the land, and then they go away, right? And what's left behind is this devastated earth that will never, well, I shouldn't say never, but not for many, many thousands of years, it's not going to recover. And there's no consequence to those companies that, right, they reap the profit, but they take no responsibility for restoring the land to some kind of usable form. They just walk away. And maybe it goes, without a lot of scrutiny for decades or even 100 years, but eventually they say, wow, look at, we could really use that land, and the land is devastated. There's nothing you can do about it. And that company is long gone, right? They've had their profit and they might not even exist anymore. So there's so little consequence. And in terms of attitudes, there's people who believe that humans are given dominion over the earth. And so it's reasonable to exploit it for all you can get out of it, right? Some people accept that resource exploitation can be done with no regard for future generations or the flora or the fauna of the future, and all in the name of human prosperity. And speaking of human prosperity, it gets regarded only in material terms of wealth and what are your possessions. So that's a big problem. And also, many deny the science that we're doing. This is really good science, right? Climate science is fantastic work. And they deny the science and they want to just carry out business as usual and pretend like nothing is happening. So, in other words, the root cause is actually entirely spiritual, right? It's that ethical side of the human being that is the root cause. And this is material progress without heeding the spiritual guidance, right? That is one of the big benefits of a spiritual recognition, is that it's not just about the material. So, what insights do the religious writings offer? Well, overall, right, and it doesn't matter which of the great world religions you refer to, each and every one of them in some way call upon us to be the stewards of God's creation and to act with selflessness and with moderation. And of course, practically, right, they do acknowledge that it is acceptable to acquire material things as long as it doesn't come between us and God. And actually, I might add, and his creation, right? And it also reminds us of our interconnectedness with nature and with each other. And so I'm going to share a few quotations here. I don't want to overdo it, but I do want to give enough that you can appreciate that it's coming from all places. So this particular one I'm quoting from the book of Ecclesiastes, but a version of it, right, in the Jewish um, tradition in which there is a rabbinical contribution to it. So there's some additional interpretation offered alongside with the scriptures itself. So it says, when God created the first human beings, God led them around all the trees of the Garden of Eden and said, "See my works, how beautiful and praiseworthy they are. Think of this and do not corrupt or destroy my world." So very clear guidance there. A second I will offer, this is from Islam. This is the Quran, chapter number 55, Surah 55. It says, "The herbs and the trees adore, and the heavens, he raised them and set the balance, that ye should not be outrageous in the balance, but weigh ye aright and stint not the balance." If I may put this into more modern language, basically it's saying that the ecosystem that God put here is in balance, and we need to weigh our actions and not disrupt, not destroy that balance. This next quotation is actually from the Baha'i writings, from the author himself, Baha'u'llah, which says, "Nature in its essence is the embodiment of my name, the maker, the creator. Its manifestations are diversified by varying causes, and in this diversity there are signs for men of discernment. Nature is God's will and is its expression in and through the contingent world." What's meant by contingent world? That's our material world, right? This earth that we live on. And so if nature is God's will and its expression in and through this material world, then, and everything in here, right, has importance, and its diversity existing has value to us, then obviously this means that we can't just go and wreck it all, right? And indeed, this loss of biodiversity that we talked about, right, is that damage to this beautiful system that has been put here for us. So that's very clear as well. This next quotation also comes from a Baha'i source, and that source is the existence of an institution that guides the activity of the community worldwide, right? It's called the Universal House of Justice. So basically, like the worldwide trustees of the entire community and the source of continuing guidance for the community. So here, this esteemed body says, "The principle of the oneness of humankind, as proclaimed by Baha'u'llah, asks not merely for cooperation among people and nations. It calls for a complete reconceptualization of the relationships that sustain society. The deepening environmental crisis, driven by a system that condones the pillage of natural resources to satisfy an insatiable thirst for more, suggests how entirely inadequate is the present conception of humanity's relationship with nature, right? So they're really making us think, what are you doing, right? And for what are you doing it? Why are you pillaging the natural resources, right? For mere material um, um, satisfaction, right? So I'm quoting them again on this next page. The welfare of any segment of humanity is inextricably bound up with the welfare of the whole. Humanity's collective life suffers when any one group thinks of its own well-being in isolation from that of its neighbors, or pursues economic gain without regard for how the natural environment, which provides sustenance for all, is affected. And they continue on to say there is an inherent moral dimension to the generation, distribution, and utilization of wealth and resources. So pointing out the evils of, we think we're the only ones on this planet and we can do whatever we want to this planet. No, it impacts everybody else too. We aren't in isolation. And if we overuse, right? Like if we per capita are using things at a rate of 10 or 20 times faster than other places of the world, how dare we do that, right? That's some of what I get out of this one. So these things beg a question. So then, if it's not purely material, what is true prosperity? So the true meaning of prosperity in relation to wealth really needs to be re-examined. And it has to encompass more than just a purely materialistic view. True prosperity is based on social justice, reciprocity, and equity. Right? These are really the three things that are kind of at the basis of society itself. It requires the well-being of all members of society, not just one group or one nation. And we all need to adopt a new attitude toward wealth, to practice moderation, and to reflect on the real purpose of the journey of our life on this planet. Why are we here, right? And are we just purely material beings? Well, most don't think so, right? We acknowledge that we are spiritual beings and that the bulk of our existence is going to be in that next part of our journey after our journey on this planet. And so what's our real purpose for being here if it's just a small portion of our long, eternal, literally infinite existence? Good question to ask. And so then true prosperity, and I'm actually paraphrasing this from another wonderful quotation of the House of Justice. True prosperity is the fruit of a dynamic coherence between the material and spiritual requirements of life. We can't ignore both of them. We can't exclude one in favor of the other, right? We can't have a purely material view. We also can't have a purely spiritual view because the practical material aspects of life can't be ignored, right? Or, well, we'll die, right? So obviously we can't ignore that half. But people do tend to largely ignore that spiritual side, which is a real tragedy. Okay, so I've shared a fairly bleak picture. And here's a really essential question we have to ask. Is there reason for hope? And resoundingly, yes, there is. So science is most certainly showing us our reality, right? And then the applied science, the engineering, right? The development of technology provides us with the tools, but we need to muster the will in order to make the best use of that science and of all that technology and all that great engineering. And to muster that will, we have to tap into the spiritual guidance, right? That's literally why that guidance does exist, is so that we can develop the will to do what is really required of us to do, and then to be able to sustain that as a continuous action. And so much of what we need technologically, in fact, already does exist. That's great news. And uh, it does continue to get better and better, right? And so we already have everything we really, really have to have, and we're getting even better at it. But what outcome is there going to be? Well, in religion is supposed to give us inspiration, and within the Baha'i writings, it assures us that this Baha'i cycle, which began actually in 1844, so it's not very old, this cycle would last no less than 500,000 years. There's an obvious implication of that statement. Therefore, humankind is going to last no less than 500,000 years. So we're not going to go extinct, right? And so we know there is a happy ending. So all these things give us very sound reasons for hope, but we really have to act right now. And so that begs another really important question. What can I do, right? I'm looking in the mirror when I ask this question, what can I do? And you can ask, right? Stand in the mirror, you ask yourselves, what can I do? Well, we can become more aware. That, right, it starts with educating ourselves. You can go to the iefworld.org website. You see the link right there. There is such a wealth of information there. It's fantastic. In fact, the International Environment Forum is not an activist organization, right? Its mission is to educate and not to disrupt life for people by blockading a bridge somewhere and having a protest or whatever, right? That some groups actually do, right? It's for education. A second really great resource is to go to nature.org, and on there you'll see through this link, but you can find it just by looking at the website, a place where you can calculate your own carbon footprint. So this is actually really quite a revelation, because how do we even know what impact as an individual or as a family, right? My family unit, what impact are we having on the world? And by understanding where we're having the impact, we can look at specific action that we can take to make things better. So you can click on Get Started, and that will guide you through it all. But there are categories of things in there. It will examine our travel, right? From simple things like hopping in the car and driving to work, or the big vacation that we do once a year, or if you're more wealthy, more than once a year. What's the impact of your home, right? Your family environment and so on. How about your diet, right? And what kind of changes could you make to that? How about your consumption habits, right? What kinds of things do you shop for, and what's the impact of that? And so then it will look at all these things and determine, I love the symbol they use here, literally your footprint, right? Your carbon footprint. And even though carbon isn't the only thing out there, right? But that's a great starting point to really examine. And then you can see how you can take action. So that's a worthwhile endeavor. I did this myself. About a year ago, I was asked to join the International Environment Forum, and I felt like, well, if I'm going to help educate people and contribute to the knowledge base that they have, and I do have some specialty areas that I think all the people of the IEF are pretty well conversant across all of these disciplines. But Some of us have areas where we're much stronger than others. And in my case, it's on energy systems, right? Energy production, energy consumption, and on transportation and communication systems. So those I have particular expertise in. And I've been learning a lot on food systems and on land use and all these other things that are important. But I'll never be as knowledgeable in those areas as I am on these other ones that I mentioned. And I will probably make some other contributions onto the IEF website in some of those other areas, and probably do some other talks like, hey, if you're going to look at your own transportation choices, what can you do? I can guarantee you I will do future talks on that area as well. But let's go continue this idea of what can I do? And uh, so we're educating ourselves on that last slide, and over here we can now start really acting, right? We can obviously improve our own footprint, but we can help others become more aware of the contribution that they have. Now, here's the truth, right? Each of us is like a drop. How many people live in this world, right? We're talking 8 billion and something. And so if I do something and the other 7.99999 billion do nothing, then I don't make any difference at all, honestly, right? Alone, we have practically no impact at all. But as each of us are like a drop, as we act and we have our circle of friends, right, acting with us, and maybe we can even impact a neighborhood and we can get a whole neighborhood to do better. And maybe, join an organization like I did with the IEF, and you can impact people that are beyond your neighborhood, right? People that might never even meet. And you can help them recognize and make changes, right? And then if we all start doing that kind of thing, then each of us little drops combine and we turn into streams and rivers and lakes, and we become the ocean, right? If we can reach everybody. And so you have much more influence and much more capability than you might even imagine that you do. And so please make use of that, and with this kind of educational effort. So this is my last slide that I'll share. So what else we can do is really based on attitude. We can have hope, right? In a world that is despairing, and people giving up will help nothing, right? In fact, think about many people are into sports of some kind. I don't know what your favorite sport is. I'll use basketball. That's not my favorite, but hey, I'll catch a game every now and then. But look at a basketball team, right? The team might be down 10 points. Do they give up? Do they just lay down and say, well, that's it? It's game over, right? No, they're going right to the final buzzer, and they are striving and striving, and they are not giving up, right? Let that example inspire you. Have hope. Inspire yourself, inspire other people, maintain a positive view of the future, regardless of the ordeals that we see humanity currently and even in the future enduring on its way, right? And the ultimate vision for humanity is that every one of us drops, right? Every one of us humans will recognize the oneness of humanity, our interconnectedness, and that need for us to care about everybody else too, and not just about ourselves, and not just about our family or our limited neighborhood or our city or our state or province or our prefect, right? Or our nation, right? Our loyalty is to the planet Earth that gives us life and sustains us. And that we will all recognize this. right? And so we will go through much greater ordeals until we are all there at that point. But we can't lose hope. We need to be the source of hope for other people and get them on board with having this vision and having this desire to help. And so, here's a great question to ask. Okay, so have hope, inspire, maintain that positive view. How do I do that when I'm confronted by so much failure to act? Like, look at, a climate hero is Greta Thunberg. And uh, look at her, right? And she's always going somewhere. And she became famous by her one person protest, right? Trying to force her country to start acting responsibly and that they're not doing enough. And she shows up at these international forums and in pretty harsh terms, right, is reminding the political world that you're really not doing enough, right? You're making a lot of promises, but you're not holding yourself to these promises, etc., right? So she's pointing these out. So you can get really negative and you could give up, right? And say, right, who cares, right? The politicians, they talk and then you look at the scorecard of a particular nation and, well, they didn't meet this, they didn't do that. They made this promise and they didn't meet it, right? So there's plenty of example that's disappointing out there. So how do I maintain all these three things and not getting um, totally discouraged by seeing an inadequate response? Well, in order to get past that, we really have to have that vision of the future. If we don't have the vision, then you will not be able to sustain that kind of hope and inspiration and optimism that we need to have. Because if you lose those things, then you're that basketball team that just lies down on the court and just lets the other team win, right? And we don't do that, right? We're better than that. And so we have this vision of the future from God Himself, and it gets communicated to us through Baha'u'llah most recently. And if you don't accept that, fine. Use the Quran. You don't accept that, fine. Use the Bible. Use whatever spiritual tools you have, and develop a positive vision of the future. And if your thing isn't giving you that positive vision of the future, I don't mean this in a flippant way, but you got the wrong thing. Go find a better thing because that is out there. And right, if it's not doing its job for you, there's plenty out there that will. So go find it and contact me. I'll help you find it. All right. But I'm going to end with this quotation. This is again from the Old Testament of the Bible. It comes from the King James translation in the book of Proverbs. It says, "Where there is no vision, the people perish. But he that keepeth the law, happy is he." And one thing I like about this quotation, it equates in kind of an indirect way, but it equates the keeping of the law with having a vision. And so, right, you get this coherence, everything with everything. All right, so I'm going to stop my screen share. And hi, you can see me full screen now. And I'll just conclude by thanking you for taking the time to watching this video. And I do promise, I can't promise when, but I do promise I will put some things that are more specific, really addressing the what can I do kind of question in the area of transportation and communication and in energy systems. So I'll be putting that together and adding all of this onto my YouTube channel. So thank you. Share this with other people, send them a link, right? Let's get other people inspired and let's work together to have this positive vision and these helpful actions that are going to treat our Mother Earth the way that she deserves to be treated. Right. Thank you.